Greetings, fellow floofs. My name, for all intents and purposes, is Charlotte, and I welcome you to my YouTube channel. Not sure how it happened, but this week a big topic of my discussion was sheep. Yeah, I can't remember the last time I was actively thinking about them, but this past week they creeped into not only a book I was reading, but also were the main characters in a movie that I now consider my favorite film of the year. Guess that's just how it goes. Other than the somewhat unexpected education on these barnyard animals, the books this week were kind of all over the place. Some were weird, some were cute and cozy, and some were just kind of quite depressing and really infuriating. So let's get into it. After all, I am here to be mad. Here we have The Anomaly by Hervé Tellier. No, sheep were not the anomaly, there were no sheep in this one, though I'm pretty sure if there were, they would have quite a lot to say. Truth be told, I have no idea why I have this book. From the description in the back, it's not my typical genre. There's like 3 of them mentioned, and neither is my usual choice. I don't remember buying it, and it was definitely not gifted to me. All I can think of what could have happened is that I was meeting a friend at a bookstore, I was early or she was late, and so I just spent too much time there. You know how it is? You walk around like for like 15 minutes around the fiction section, and now you just kind of feel like you have to buy something because otherwise you've been looking at all these interesting books for no reason. That's probably the type of purchase that this was. To finish off this tangent, I'm kind of surprised that it took me so long to actually read it because I'm pretty limited in my selection of physical books here. I prefer to buy physical books when I visit my family back home, and sadly I can't visit too often. So I usually just read ebooks. But recently it finally caught my eye, and I'm so glad it did. Turns out it's not a prix Goncourt, excuse my French, winner for nothing. This prize is given out to the best and most imaginative prose of the year, and yeah, I can see the reasoning behind this win. Not only is the story itself quite a ride, but also the writing style is pretty curious. I'm a little bit sad that I can't read it in the original, but I'm pretty sure that even the translation managed to bring across the intentions of the author. Especially for the first third of the novel, each chapter is written in a distinct genre that's different from each other, like thriller, psychological novel, romantic drama, and so on. What's kind of intriguing about reading this first section of the book is that in each chapter we're meeting different, seemingly random people and kind of learning about their lives. We have a writer from France, a singer from Nigeria, a family from the US, a contract killer. Yes, there's a contract killer here. Altogether, I think we meet like 8 different characters. And the only thing they have in common is that they all shiver at the thought of the flight that they had been on like 3 months ago from Paris to New York. The turbulence was so bad, people were pretty sure they were all gonna die. But then it was all fine. Or was it? Well, at the end of each chapter, like the FBI, the MI6, or some other police enforcement agency is picking them up, and that's where the story really begins. I really don't want to give away the main twist of the book, or at least what can be considered the main twist for the first 80% of the book. There were many parts of the story that I could consider my favorites for very different reasons. Some were really funny, and some were quite deep and thoughtful. Some also relied on pretty decent science, which I quite appreciated. Reading the chapter with the interviews was quite trippy, and the reference to encounters of the third kind was so funny, I actually had tears in my eyes. Top choice would be probably the beginning of the second section of the book, where we meet Adrian Miller, a mathematician of probability from Princeton University. It's been like 20 years, but he must now deal with the highly classified and unusual Protocol 42 that he and his colleague created, because the military has some really serious questions. Pretty much every character of the book is really enjoyable in their own way, and because of the predicament that they find themselves in, you kind of really feel for them, most of them. There is a contract killer here, after all. There are chapters of the book that deal with some very deep considerations, like the nature of life, the soul, human uniqueness, although it's all explained in a pretty accessible and understandable way. Some aspects of the story are not fully wrapped up by the end of the book, and some revelations are kind of hard to put aside, like the China incident. If you know, you know. But overall, life moves on for the characters, and they kind of have to adapt. And then come the last couple chapters of the book, and you shiver at the thought that this might be our reality. I hope I gave away enough of the book to sound really worth the read. I wish I could forget it, just so that I could read it again. As I said, it starts a bit slow and kind of confusing, but it does draw you in, and by the time Miller is talking about Protocol 42, you're fully hooked and can't wait to see where the story goes. I need to stop gushing now. 10 out of 10. I wish more people knew about it. I picked this up from my library's suggestion tab, And while this book is not going to get as glowing a review as the last one, it was still at least pretty informative and emotion inducing, even though not all of the emotions were positive. But I mean, it's better for a book to make you feel things instead of you just reading it and then forgetting about it, right? So, this is probably the book that made me the saddest lately. The historical setting and the life circumstances of our two main characters were just kind of pretty bleak. We meet them, 16-year-old Gloria and her 12-year-old brother Robert, in the 1950s in a very segregated Florida. Not only did they recently lose their mother, but also their father had to basically escape the town after his activism gets him falsely accused and almost killed by the white men in town. With these prejudices working against them, it is no wonder that after Robert slightly hurts the son of the biggest plantation owner around, who was making unwanted advances towards Gloria, he is swiftly brought to justice, feel the very heavy quotation marks here, and sent to a disciplinary school for 6 months. That would be the titular reformatory. Now, there are already horrible rumors going around about this place. The punishments are really harsh. A lot of kids get their sentences extended, some don't even survive it. But when Robert actually arrives there, he realizes, to his horror, that his ability, so this is where some fantastical elements come in, his ability to see ghosts, basically, is dialed up to like 11 at that place. Mainly probably because there's so many of them and they are so restless. Why exactly? Well, you would have to ask Warden Haddock, although it's better to avoid that man like the plague. Most of the story revolves around Robert's time at the reformatory and all the horrors that he learns and experiences while he's there for a relatively short amount of time. And on Gloria's side, we follow her try to go through legal channels to get her brother out until a certain point at least. I think the aspects of the story that I most enjoyed revolved around basically the historical setting and learning about the realities that these characters had to live with. As somebody pretty far removed from those realities, it was quite educational to learn about the lives of African American people after the abolition of slavery, but while living in severe segregation. Therefore, Gloria's attempts to go through the official channels to free her brother, who I can't stress this enough, and I will be stressing it for better and for worse, is only 12 years old, were very illuminating as to the societal attitudes of that time. Where the story often bugged me is when it concerned Robert. Of course, with the gift of hindsight, and even with the very limited information I know about those times, it is easy for me to judge the brother for kind of acting up and being naive. But then again, how much awareness and agency can I really expect from a 12-year-old? I think this uncertainty about like how much sentience I can ascribe to a little kid made it a bit difficult to get immersed into the story. There were many things he did, especially while at the reformatory, that were not only ill-advised, but like actually stupid. But I can't really judge him like I would an adult because he's only 12 years old. I guess I just really had trouble with the main character being so young. It was definitely justified in terms of theme and story, but for me personally, it added too many qualms to many of the situations. Although there are definitely moments in the story where you are happy that he is that young. And while we are hovering close to that subject, while most characters in the story seemed believably real, the warden was just cartoonishly evil, committing one horror after another. Like, you wouldn't be surprised at a certain point to learn that he enjoys drinking the blood of infants. Just a thought I had while reading. Totally normal reading thought. I did like the ending of the book. It was kind of as happy as it could have been, though it did feel a little bit drawn out. But there was also an event close to the end of the book that makes me very sad to think about it every time. With all my gripes and complaining, I would still recommend this book, even if just for the education. So I would give it 7 out of 10. Next up, A Dark and Secret Magic by Wallis Kinney. This discussion will be shorter than the previous ones. This was a pretty simple, cozy, witchy read with some romance and surprisingly cooking recipes. Quick and not too deep. I think I enjoyed the ambiance of the life of the main heroine more than the actual adventure that she found herself in. But not to get ahead, this is the overall plot. Hecate, great witch name, very on the nose, lives in a small cottage outside of town, tends to her extensive garden, and makes potions and salves that she sells at the apothecary shop that she owns with her friend. Now, this makes sense because Hecate is a hedge witch, which means she is tasked with helping witches with healing, a duty that she has not exactly chosen, but has almost fully accepted. Overall, Hecate seems pretty content with her life, and I mean, I myself was thinking that living in a small cute cottage near a small cute town with a cute cat named Merlin and owning a business where you only have to show up a couple times a week, it seemed like a very comfortable way of living. Right after the first few pages, we are treated to a distractingly detailed cooking recipe that she's preparing for dinner, which just kind of took me out of the story and made me want to go cook instead. Sadly, life can't remain that idyllic, and the story kicks into high gear a week before Halloween and her 31st birthday. An unexpected, but very handsome visitor arrives from her past and requests the sanctuary of a hedge witch. He is very mysterious and kind of dangerous, and again, very handsome, so you're like, oh, the main romance plotline has arrived. Now, I did like that there was a pretty solid plot outside of the romance, because in part because of Matthew arriving and partly because of her own snooping, Hecate realizes that a big chunk of her abilities and powers has been kept from her, and when Halloween comes, she's going to have to make some tough decisions. I appreciated the emotional support that the main love interest was providing, but of course there had to be some like secrets and misunderstandings, and that kind of the plot really annoyed me. At about 75% of the book, when we already know that there's a serious threat to the main character and that the coven actively tried to hide things from her, while the guy was really trying to help her in any way that he could, she loses all trust for him basically over nothing. It just felt very, now we need them to fight and separate right before the climactic ending. I don't enjoy will they won't they's, and I don't really enjoy enemies to lovers either, secrets and miscommunications. Just give me a straight up normal relationship with mutual trust and respect, decent communication, and emotional support. I know it's kind of a tall order, but I prefer the obstacles to be in the main adventure instead of in the developing romance. Give me a stable relationship and then create issues around it. That would be my ideal story. That is also a reason why I don't read much romantasy. If the main characters aren't in their 20s, I do not trust their decision making process, especially when it comes to romance. The ending was a bit contrived and confusing lore wise, but it did all more or less work out for the main characters. I did not like the Coven storyline though. Not only did it feel kind of underdeveloped, but also some of the characters were so flawed they were straight up villains, and it didn't get resolved pretty much at all. Though I did like the magic rules and the specializations, at least the ones that we learned about, I too would like for there to be magic in my food. And speaking of which, there's actually a small book of recipes at the end of this book. Nothing too crazy, and I haven't tried any of them yet, but they did look promising, so I copied some. In the end, the book was much lighter than both the previous ones, so I guess that worked for me. But after a pretty solid first half, it kind of devolved into tropes that I don't really like. So I guess it's like a 6 out of 10 for me. In contrast to that witchy tale with romance on the side, the next book, A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, really delivered on both the magic and the romance plot much better. I had high expectations for this book because I had actually read a different one from this author not too long ago called The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. And that one is actually probably still my favorite, like, cozy witchy novel. But this one is now not far behind. 15-year-old Sarah Swan, sounds like a superhero name, has really incredibly strong magical powers and also very shitty parents. But at least she has a great aunt who takes very good care of her. So, what do you do when the aunt unexpectedly dies? Obviously, you resurrect her with the help of your incredible magical powers and a talking fox slash former witch. The consequence? You deplete most of your magical ability. Basically exiled from the magical community. 15 years later, Sarah still lives at the inn that her aunt owns and operates and helps run it as well, and uses her remaining magic to like grow some stuff in the garden and lightly heat the rooms. At this point, the couple guests that they have at the inn are basically permanent residents, and life is pretty stable, even if she really misses having the whole magical world at her feet. So when a way presents itself to basically perform like a restoration of her magic, she grabs at the chance. And when at the same time an unexpected guest shows up at the inn, he might actually be really helpful with that. So this story was everything that I would want a witchy magical story with a romance plotline to be. The main characters act like adults with their own lives and worries, but they help each other and in the process grow closer. They really learn each other's characters and values, which makes the romance feel a lot more organic. The love story overall followed a pretty similar path to the one in her first book, but because I really enjoyed it there as well, I wasn't mad at the absence of innovation. Life at the inn was kind of a bit insane, but you really appreciate all these side characters as well, and their lives don't seem less important than those of the main characters. I also liked, especially in the last like 25% of the book, that the world of our character really expands. She now not only participates in the life of the like few people at the inn, but also in the life and governance of the magical community overall, bringing about some serious change. So, yeah, if you're on the lookout for a cozy book with witches, magic, romance, and an undead rooster, yes, there's an undead rooster there, I would highly recommend A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping and the author Sangu Mandanna overall. 10 out of 10. Ha! You already forgot about the sheep, didn't you? Well, they didn't forget about you, and now would like for you to vacate your house, please and thank you. Well, it isn't really the will of the sheep, but it doesn't much matter in the end, does it? In this short novel, set in the 19th century in Scotland, we learn about the historical event called the Highland Clearances, where a lot of landowners forcefully evicted a lot of tenants off the land that they had been living on for generations, oftentimes with the goal of bringing in sheep to live there instead. Turns out, sheep are like the most cost effective animal you can think of. You can just plop them on the piece of land with some grass and then only come by twice a year to like shear them and during lambing season. That was obviously a lot more profitable for the landowners than having human tenants because those obviously have to also carry for their own survival. So, because of this, many evictions were carried out, and that's also kind of the main plot of this book. A wealthy landowner hires an impoverished minister to go to a remote island somewhere in the North Sea and evict the only tenant that still remains living there. So he takes the job, leaves his wife to wait for him, and makes his way over to the island. While he is already nervous about accomplishing this task in like the kindest way possible, complications are already expected because the man Ivar does not speak English, and John Ferguson, the minister, doesn't speak his like peculiar dialect. After an unexpected turn of events, they kind of start getting to know each other, and to John, it is especially interesting to learn the language. The bond that develops between these two men during the course of the story feels kind of unlikely, but also very human and beautiful. The story is pretty short, but the characters get a lot of backstory and emotions, so they really feel like fully fleshed out people. The story ends, on one hand, exactly how you would expect it to end, and then on the other, there was a plot twist that I really did not see coming. It was fun though, I really enjoyed it. Sadly, very few sheep actually appear in the story, but it was still kind of funny that their arrival was like such a looming presence in the book. I'd give this 8 out of 10. Lovely story about human connection and sheep. And now, with the book reviews done, let's move on to the second part of the video, the movie review. It's a different day now, and I'm back to talk about a movie that kind of caught me off guard with how great it was, even though my expectations for it were already pretty high. The Sheep Detectives. I first learned about it from the booklet that my favorite cinema chain releases regularly to kind of give an idea on upcoming movies. And I mean, how could a poster like this not catch my attention? A bunch of funny CGI sheep, and then also Hugh Jackman? Sign me up right now. Apparently, I'll go to anything that he decides to appear in because next week I'm planning to go to The Death of Robin Hood. Yes, he is Robin Hood. You guessed it. Does seem like it's gonna be a very different vibe though. But I'm curious, so what the hell? The Sheep Detectives, however, are kind of in this category of movies that are kind of my favorites to check out. Weird, memorable concepts, interesting visuals, kind of dark humor, a little bit off the wall, if you will. From the last couple of months, these movies would include Dust Bunny. An 8-year-old girl hires the hitman that lives next door to her to kill the monster that lives under her bed and has presumably eaten her parents. Good luck, have fun, don't die. A semi crazy guy from the future comes back to assemble sort of a suicide squad full of people to save the future from AI. And Good Boy, a family with its own issues, I would say, kidnaps a very delinquent, drug abusing kid. I think he's like 19, 20 years old, and decides to rehabilitate him right from the comfort of their own basement. And then we have the Sheep Detectives. In short, it is a story about a bunch of sheep in rural England trying to solve the murder of their shepherd George, played by Hugh Jackman. The story is heavily based on, even though it doesn't fully follow, a book called Three Bags Full that was written by Leonie Swan, a German crime writer. Fun fact, German movie titles are actually often very different from the original ones, so when every poster that I saw around here basically said Glen Kill, a sheep detective story, I was kind of very confused. Even after watching the movie, I still could not tell why exactly that was the title. It was very weird. Well, it turns out that in the book, the story is set near the Irish town of Glenkill, whereas in the movie, the story was moved to the English town of Denbrook. So that solved that mystery. But now, let's get to the actual murder mystery. Okay, I really love this film. I think this is actually my favorite one that I saw this year. I keep recommending other people to just go see it. I kind of really can't imagine somebody who will not like it. So if you're watching this without having seen it, I would highly, highly recommend you go watch it. You will not regret it. But if you're staying here, allow me to spoil the whole thing for you. And this is a murder mystery, okay? So spoilers are very serious. Okay? Okay. Now that we have established a verbal contract, let's get into everything that actually happens in the movie. I only have kind of minor complaints about it, so I won't need to do a massive list like I did for The Devil Wears Prada 2. So I'll just follow the plot and give my comments accordingly. So let's go. We start out strong right away with the iconic lion roar in the opening credits being replaced by the, I would say, now just as iconic sheep bleat. We then move through the opening sequence with George, the shepherd, who is narrating a letter that he's writing to somebody called Rebecca. He tells her all about his flock and his views on happiness in life.
Taking care of the kindest creatures on earth.
Over the course of the movie, we learn more about him, and he really appears to be a loner, skeptical of other people, but fiercely protective of his sheep. Actually, the location on his property where the caravan is placed in which he lives was chosen so that on the horizon no other landmarks would be seen. It's all hills and trees, no towns or humans. We are introduced to many different sheep who have all been given names by George, and he talks about their personalities as he understands them, and his daily routine of taking care of them, and his hopes that Rebecca will one day come to visit them and get to know them. One of the things he really enjoys doing is reading to the sheep in the evenings, mostly murder mysteries.
I choose a book to read out loud to them. Detective novels, mysteries, whodunits, all my favourites.
And even though this is a regular pastime for them, he knows that, well, at the end of the day, they are just sheep. They don't actually understand what he's telling them.
I like to pretend that they follow along with the story, but as special as they are, they're still sheep.
No more. Go on, a lot of you.
Why would he stop there?
He was just about to say who the killer was.
So obviously the sheep understand everything that he's telling them. I mean, without this, there wouldn't actually be a movie. But their grasp of some of the concepts of life is a little bit limited. What we also learn from the following scenes of sheep interacting with each other, and this is important not just for the plot, but also for the overarching themes of the movie, is that sheep actually have the ability to forget anything that they want to. Basically, if something unpleasant happens and they don't feel like emotionally dealing with it, they can just forget it. We see an example of this in a scene where George, played by Hugh Jackman, has a heated argument with another shepherd, Caleb. And while we don't really learn what this argument was about right away, the sheep really don't like the unpleasantness that they have just witnessed, so they just collectively decide to forget it. This is where I'd like to introduce you to the cast of sheep. Not to sound kind of ignorant, because I definitely knew in the back of my mind that there are different types of sheep, but because I grew up and lived in cities, I never actually felt the need to, learn more about them. So this was kind of educational. We got Sir Richfield, a Boer sheep, who is actually voiced by Patrick Stewart of X-Men fame. Cloud, a North Country Cheviot sheep. Bit of a diva, that one. Isn't my accent great? Brothers Reggie and Ronnie, Norfolk horn sheep, who are kind of a little bit destructive.
I want to bash it. I want to bash it so bad.
Stop!
Wool Eyes, a Lincoln long wool sheep, who, according to George, has actually never complained about his name. Zora, a Danish landrace sheep, who is sort of this rambunctious kid running around. Mopple, a merino sheep, who is kind of the wisest of them all, and there's actually a really good reason for that. Sebastian, a black Castlemilk Moorage sheep, whose color actually kind of really fits his position in regards to the flock. And lastly, we have Lily, a Shetland sheep, who is the main character of the movie, and according to George, is also the smartest sheep in the world. She proves this to us by deducing the killer in the latest mystery novel that was being read to them, even though in the beginning nobody in the flock believes her. One of the sheep actually says that it had to have been the gardener because, and I quote, "He was always cutting the grass and never eaten any." I mean, case closed, lock him up. The next evening, when the killer from the novel is revealed, there's this perfect comedy scene where all the sheep are quiet for a second, And then Lily bleeds, and you can just kind of hear her saying, "See? Told ya." And then all the other sheep start bleating in response, presumably calling her a know-it-all. This scene, while perfectly establishing the character traits and personality of Lily, is sort of by no means a unique and isolated moment that is there just for her. All the sheep that we are introduced to have real personalities, and even though sometimes their behavior is played for comedic purposes, they still appear as grounded characters and can be connected to real people. All of them love George as their shepherd and live in harmony together, with the exception of one little guy. This is the Winter Lamb. He doesn't have a name yet, and throughout the movie, his storyline will tug on your heartstrings every chance it gets. They damn well made sure that you really feel for the kid. Apparently, usually lambs are born in the spring, but every once in a while, one is born in the winter. That's how you get the name Winter Lamb. These sheep are then ostracized, considered really, really bad luck, and generally excluded from the flock. George admits that he does not understand sheep logic, but takes really good care of the winter lamb anyways. Now, I said that only the winter lamb is excluded, which is not exactly true. Sebastian is also not really part of the flock. He prefers to roam around by his own, and even when he's on the meadow next to the flock, he prefers to spend his time on the Pride Rock, kind of like the Lion King. He also sort of has a scary reputation among the other sheep, mostly just because he's not trying to spend time with them and in general just behaves like a loner. His lack of friend appeal is also probably not really helped by his voice. That is, as actor Bryan Cranston from Walter White Breaking Bad fame describes, is
rough and sounds like someone has a perpetual sore throat.
He really gave a great performance. At times it was really gruff and dismissive, but at others he was also very emotional. Let's finally move the plot along. George delivers the letter into town to be sent, but it is intercepted from the a little bit unprofessional small town mailwoman by the innkeeper Beth, who kind of seems unhappy that George is corresponding with some woman. At the same time, a visitor arrives into town, reporter Elliot, who has been sent by his magazine to cover the Denbrook Cultural Festival, which is a little bit disappointing. We also meet some other townspeople who sort of have multiple small axes to grind with our shepherd George, namely Butcher Ham, which is a great name, just perfect choice, and Reverend Hillcoat. We also meet Detective Tim Derry.
I'm always detecting.
You're not a detective, though, are you?
Yes, sorry, Officer Derry. My mistake. I'm so sorry. The day ends with a storm, during which the tiny winter lamb is excluded from the barn. Told you they will pull on your heartstrings every chance they get. And in the morning, the sheep discover that George is laying outside in the grass, not moving. Mopple says that he is probably dead, and we learned that sheep mythology dictates that sheep don't actually die. They simply become clouds in the sky. Very comforting thought, I quite like that. What I didn't really like was the following suggestion by Lily, that because they are also sad and in distress over the death of their shepherd, they should just make their lives easier and forget about him, like they do all unpleasant things. Mopple, who turns out is the only sheep in the flock who is unable to perform memory wiping on himself, tries to convince them that that's not the right thing to do, that they loved him and they should remember him, but the flock is insistent. They almost go through with it, but are interrupted by Sebastian, who is appalled at the idea of trying to forget George. He really chastises them all for trying to take the easy way out and being weak. In the meantime, the police officer arrives at the scene, together with the reporter Elliot, who is sort of stuck in town. And even though it is proved that the police officer is not necessarily the sharpest tool in the shed,
The policeman is completely hopeless.
they together arrive at the possibility of this being a murder.
Unless there's anything out of the ordinary.
Nope, I've looked everywhere. Around the caravan, underneath the caravan.
What about inside the caravan?
Worth a shot.
George wasn't wearing a coat, even though the night was really rainy and cold, and one of his hands was painted green and the other was blue. Lily, inspired by her success of solving many a murder mystery from the books, declares that
Our shepherd was murdered. And we shall solve the crime.
Sebastian is very skeptical of this, citing that their kind is not necessarily considered the most trailblazing of animals.
Do you know what humans call stupid people who can't think for themselves?
Ducks!
Sheep!
He's talking about you.
But Lily is insistent, so he relents and agrees to escort her and Mopple into town to learn more about humans and hear the reading of the will.
In the nighttime stories, the people in the will are always the suspects.
Since I am intent on spoilering as many of the great jokes as I can for you, there's this hilarious scene of Mopple and Lily trying to comprehend what a road is, being way too scared to cross it, getting shamed by a chicken, and then ultimately mustering up the courage to overcome their fear.
What's so hard about leaving home?
We're not scared.
Mappa, what is that?
I think it's a road.
But what is it made of?
Well, not grass, I can tell you that.
I'm only a few feet away from you.
But it feels so far. Oh, no, it's impossible.
Great stuff. They enter town and learn from a unnecessarily public announcement by Officer Tim that George died through poisoning and that it was done using berries that grow all around the church. So now his investigation is officially starting. The trio of sheep pass the church, and Lily, Mopple, and us learn from the worldly educated Sebastian what church exactly is. It is where God lives. And who is God, you might ask? A big invisible lamb beaver made of bread, and they eat him on Sunday. That's what I got. Then the sheep split up to snoop around the inn where the reading of the will is going to happen. Lydia then meets with Officer Tim, who has discovered George's will on the table of the caravan, and reads it.
I put up the police tape. Stickier than I expected.
Don't care, nor would anyone ever. Have you read it? Have you even looked at it?
The lawyer is played by the amazing Emma Thompson, who in this movie is sort of channeling the energy of Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada, the first one. Same calm, low, controlled voice that can basically deadpan deliver any insult, and it will take the recipient a good 10 seconds to figure out what had just been said to them. She had some incredibly funny moments with the characters, mostly the human ones. Like in this interaction, she says to the confused and bumbling Officer Tim, a little bit judgingly, "Is this your first murder?" And he replies in a horrified voice, "You think I killed him?" The performances of the human actors were a little bit campy to me, like slightly exaggerated, but I really feel that this was the intention and that it worked in favor of the film because it kind of gave it an additional lightness and comedy. Back to the plot. Officer Tim gathers everybody who the will mentions should be present during the reading, and lawyer Lydia throws reporter Elliot out of the room. He is just too eager to get in on this murder investigation. We learn that the mysterious young woman is the aforementioned Rebecca, and that she is actually the daughter of George. She also has a twin brother, Peter Van Buren, and that he actually lives in South Africa and is connecting to this meeting via phone call. George gave them both up for adoption when they were born because he was too distraught over his wife dying in childbirth, but because this was a closed adoption, he only managed to track them down and get in touch with them recently. So this is who our Lily and Sebastian are spying on through the window. Lawyer Lydia, daughter Rebecca, Officer Tim, Innkeeper Beth, Shepherd Caleb, Reverend Hillcoat, Butcher Ham, and son on the phone Peter. Lydia announces that as per George's will, the people gathered here include a fool, a victim, a false shepherd, 2 murderers, a spring lamb, and a winter lamb. You can deduce for yourself who is who and why. The lawyer also tells them that there are 2 wills, the old one that she brought and the new one that was found in George's caravan. Caleb comments that it doesn't really matter because George didn't have much anyways, to which Lydia replies that, well, he had the land that he lived on, which is now going to be going to Rebecca, and that he had the land that Caleb lives on, which is now going to be going to his son Peter, and that there's also the $30 million that he received from a pharmaceutical company for developing a very important blue sheep medication that he was also constantly using.
Well, actually, there is $30 million. And we have our motive.
Okay, I noticed that my camera started falling over, so there's a very funny time lapse somewhere in there where the picture just goes. Everything should be fine now, though. Back to the story. The money was originally supposed to go to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, but the new will states that all of it is now going to Rebecca. Officer Tim tries to clumsily question Rebecca about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, and she kind of gives very unconvincing answers, but he doesn't really press the issue. After all, he kind of has other priorities in mind.
Follow-up question. Do you have a boyfriend?
Oh, this is hard to watch.
What? That's a standard question any investigator would ask in this situation.
The gathering is then interrupted by Mopple, who is rampaging through the inn because his eyes are covered with a sky blue pillowcase with some green stains on it. Mysterious. The sheep now know that the money is most likely the motive for the murder, and since Rebecca is now the beneficiary, she is obviously the prime suspect. Upon returning to the flock, the sheep agree that Officer Tim kind of requires some education on matters of murder solving, so they grab a murder mystery book from George's caravan and deliver it to Tim, who comes out opening the door in full riot gear. It is admirable, though, that he wants to learn and solve the murder, because by morning he has already read the full book and also assembled a full murder board with suspects and means, motive, and opportunity. Reporter Elliot encourages him to continue. The creators of this movie have stated in an interview that they really love stories in which the ambition of the characters far exceeds their ability. And this can really be said both for the sheep, who are not exactly thought of as smart and capable, but also obviously the officer, who is quite ill equipped to handle this, at least at the beginning. Later on in the meadow, Mopple and Lily are kind of questioning whether Rebecca really is the guilty one, but Cloud tells them that she actually saw Rebecca that night in the meadow, and there's even proof of this, one of her bracelets in the grass. Then, the sheep force Officer Tim to chase them by stealing his police cap and lead him to the bracelet. He is really confused about what's up with those sheep. I love this scene. Now that they have some evidence that Rebecca actually lied about never having met her father in person, Tim and Elliot go to her room to confront her, they search her room, and then they find that the berries that were used to poison George are in the soles of her boots. Tim then uses this evidence to arrest her. She tells her side of the story, saying that she just had a conversation with her father that night and that she didn't do anything wrong, but Tim doesn't believe her. Thinking that the murder is now solved and that most likely their flock is going to be added to the flock of Caleb, investigators Lily and Mopple decide to go visit over there and start getting to know them. But when they arrive, the other sheep are all wearing bells around their necks, act really terrified, and tell them to run. They run into a big barn where they discover that Caleb is actually raising sheep for meat, and he is working with Butcher Ham. Shocked, they are ambushed by the German shepherds that Caleb owns, and then get chased through the property. And when Lily is almost caught, Sebastian runs in to fight them. By now, we have actually learned Sebastian's backstory. When he was a lamb, he was in a petting zoo, and everything was great. But then when he grew up, he was moved into an animal fighting ring at a carnival and was forced to fight for his survival. That is actually where George has rescued him from. Lily wonders why Sebastian didn't have a flock, and then realizes that he actually also was a winter lamb, ostracized from his community. In the present, he fights the dogs and they run away, but he is too badly hurt and dies from his wounds. That part of the movie was dark, not just in the sense that it all happened at night, but also because I just didn't expect such a tragic death scene in a family movie. I mean, yeah, George dies, but that's kind of a gist. That's kind of the gist of a murder mystery, and you sort of make your peace with that before the movie even begins. But Sebastian, we actually spent a lot of time with, we got attached to him. I really hope that he's going to become part of the flock at the end of this, especially after learning his tragic backstory. They also had nice chemistry, Lily and him, so his death was really a gut punch. I was really sobbing in the movie theater, I'll tell you that. And even now, sometimes when I think about it, my eyes really start to tear up. Once Mopple and Lily come back to the flock, Lily sort of comes to terms with what death really is and realizes that there have probably been times in the past when she had experienced it but decided to forget. She tries to rouse the other sheep to run away and protect themselves from Caleb and the butcher, but they become panicked and scared and kind of revert to this flock mentality, deciding to just forget everything that she told them. Mopple, who is actually the only one who cannot memory wipe himself, tries to explain to Lily that remembrance of the past is important and valuable, and you shouldn't just throw it away, but she's really distraught and tries to actually forget George. Instead, she kind of has a vision of his ghost comforting her, and she realizes that Rebecca is actually innocent and that she judged her without knowing her at all, just like she did with the winter lambs. Lily deduces the real killer and comes up with a way to use the winter lamb to leave behind a message for Officer Tim in the jail room where Rebecca is being held before she's going to be taken by the prosecution in the morning. That whole scene was great comedy, especially when you think about it from the perspective of the human who gets to watch a sheep bleat to a tiny lamb that just climbed through the window to start painting stuff on the floor in different colors. Yes, this town is truly weird, girl. You are correct. With the conclusion close, I would like to say that even though I rarely read or watch murder mysteries, I do really appreciate them as a genre, especially if they are done right. These stories work best, in my opinion, if there's enough information given to us, even if the clues are very subtle, to kind of deduce who the killer is by the end by yourself. To be honest, though, I myself rarely focus on the detecting aspect of the story. I rarely get who the killer is by the end, but what matters most to me is that when the mystery is revealed, that everything is clear and makes sense. So here comes the conclusion. In the morning, Tim sees the message, but can't really make sense of it. He readies to give Rebecca over to the police, then sees the sheep standing not far away, looking at him, and sort of has an epiphany. And so, in front of the townspeople and all the other police, he accuses reporter Elliot of being the killer. Turns out, Elliot is actually Peter, the son of George, who moved from South Africa a while ago. That night, he went to the caravan to kill his father and to plant the second will, knowing that if he can frame his sister for the murder, he's going to be next in line to inherit all the money instead of it going to the charity as originally planned. When his son came and poisoned him, he didn't realize that George is going to put up a fight and grab Peter's hair. And the hair was wet because it was raining, and some of the yellow hair dye that he applied to his hair to kind of mask the resemblance between them came off and stained George's blue hands green. That was also the reason why the sky blue pillowcase that reporter Elliot was using while he was staying at the inn had green stains. Tim then demands a hair strand from Elliot, who laughs and says that having dyed hair proves nothing, but the now forensically educated officer Tim replies that it's not actually for the hair dye, it's for a DNA test to match him to his father and establish a motive. Peter then tries to escape in a car, but Lily finally gives permission to Reggie and Ronnie to smash something.
I want to bash it! I want to bash it so bad!
This was probably the most used joke in the trailers, and I can kind of really see why. I recently saw Hoppers, and I also really loved the juxtaposition of the scenes where first you see animals talking to each other and everything seems normal to us, but then the scene shifts and you see it as you would if you were actually there, as in a bunch of sheep bleating loudly at each other. There were a couple jokes like this in the movie, and I would say that they hit well every time. Peter is arrested, Rebecca is released, Officer Tim gives a grateful look to the sheep. Who knows what exactly he's thinking about them right now?
Thank you all.
And they leave town, going back to their meadow, though they forget the winter lamb. See? Heartstrings being pulled, again. The will reverts to its original state. Rebecca refuses to cooperate with Caleb and Ham, and instead takes ownership of both plots of land and decides to buy out the other sheep. She also gets the letter from her father that Beth stole at the beginning of the movie, and it turns out that she and George kind of had a potential romance going on, but George wasn't really capable of that after the death of his wife, and so he just kind of chose solitude. Rebecca, along with us, also learns that her mother's name was Lily, and this is where the tears really start rolling. Next up, scene after scene, the movie makers tried to make you as emotional as possible. I'm pretty sure that for the last 7 to 10 minutes of the film, I was just continuously sobbing, harder with every scene. I guess I have to thank the lamb beaver made out of bread that I brought tissues with me to the movie theater. First, Rebecca shows up on the meadow, looking like Julie Andrews out of The Sound of Music, along with Caleb's sheep, who are now free of their collars and happy. Next, she starts to read to the flock like her father used to, and Lily sees that the tiny winter lamb is sitting alone atop the Pride Rock, just like Sebastian used to. So she goes to talk to him. I'm starting to cry. So she goes to talk to him and acknowledges that he is part of the flock, and she apologizes that they excluded him for no good reason. She then decides to name him George. Tears. Many tears falling. They then go back to the meadow to join the flock, and the previously mean Sir Richfield kind of moves out of the way to let the winter lamb, George, sit together with the other lambs. And just to finish it all off with a final punch to the gut, Lily looks up into the sky and sees a huge cloud that looks exactly like Sebastian. That one got me so hard, I had to close my nose with my hand just so that I would not loudly sob in the middle of the theater. Had to breathe through my mouth like a fish a good few minutes into the credits. I sent multiple friends and family to go watch this in the theaters and told them that it's going to be emotional at the end, and they all reported back to me various degrees of ugly crying. Okay, no crying right now. Time to add some extra thoughts. Well, there is actually one complaint that I would like to make. I have seen other people mention it, and so I feel confident including it here, even though I myself have never actually dyed my hair blonde. But I'm pretty sure that if you dye your hair blonde, that doesn't mean that there's actually going to be yellow hair dye leaching out of your hair whenever it gets wet. I mean, it happens to my hair, and I assume it also happens to brown and black hair, but blonde? Really? Maybe there could have been a different way to set up this clue, because I kind of had serious doubts whether somebody would really think that the yellow dye that was kind of heavily hinted at towards the end of the movie was coming from Elliot's hair. Not a very significant complaint overall, but it does influence whether it's possible for you to guess the mystery on your own, so I kind of felt obligated to mention it. The other sort of question that the movie sets up at an early point is the list of character types that George mentions in his will and who they correspond to. I was pretty sure from the beginning that the false shepherd is going to be Reverend Hillcoat, and that one of the murderers is going to be the butcher Ham. It was also pretty obvious from the beginning that Officer Tim is going to be the fool. Over the course of the story, I figured out that the other murderer has to be Shepherd Caleb, because obviously George could not have known that he's going to get killed, and so the two murderers comment could not have been connected to his own death. I would think that Beth was supposed to be the victim because George could not enter a relationship with her the way she would have wanted to, and so left her heartbroken. And of the two lambs, I would think that Peter was the spring lamb and Rebecca was the winter lamb, the one that's special, the one that is misunderstood but ultimately has a kind heart. Comment down below if you agree with this distribution or have other ideas. It is, of course, a little bit questionable why George would even invite all of these people to the reading of the will, but in stories like this, where the premise is a little bit bonkers, it's not always important to me that there's total realism and outside the movie logic. It is usually enough that the internal logic of the movie is consistent. And so, who knows, maybe George just wanted to flex his wealth on everybody after he was gone. We will never know. I read that a lot of people that saw the trailers were a little bit skeptical of the movie because the sheep kind of looked really weird to them. But from what I read from people who actually saw the film, everybody was really praising their look in the finished film. The creators used many, many puppets to make everything look as realistic as possible and to make the sheep act and move like sheep instead of people. When the writer of the movie, Craig Mazin, got the pitch to adapt a book about sheep investigating the murder of their own shepherd, his instant response was, "I'm in, I'll do it." And you can kind of really tell that for everybody involved, this movie was a labor of love and that it is so much more than just a silly, family-friendly comedy. The writing is very clever, and the deeper themes throughout the movie touch upon loss and remembrance, prejudice and being accepting of others, going outside your comfort zone, and self-improvement. Despite focusing very heavily on sheep, the relationships between characters feel very real. Feels like I have been talking for hours about this movie, probably because I have. I'll just finish it up by saying that it was funny, sweet, heartwarming, at times very emotional, and in general, just delightful. With how weird the concept was, I do not think that the final movie could have turned out better than it did, and I know that I will be rewatching it many times in the future. 10 out of 10, sheep enjoying themselves. Hope you have a great week, but now I gotta go take a cat nap. Bye! Meow.